Hello. This is actually a lecture I've wanted to get down onto a video for a long time. Analytical writing is one of those things that looks really hard but is actually quite easy. Unlike creative writing, which can take many shapes, analytical writing is rather formulaic and mathematical. That's why, in my view, a 10-page analytical paper is much easier to write than, say, a short story. For this lecture, I'm going to be referencing the film The Grapes of Wrath. If you're following the module, you should have already watched it. It will help you better understand my references. Furthermore, in your textual analysis, you will be asked to analyze a 5-minute sequence in a film of your choice. So I have pre-selected a sequence from Grapes of Wrath, which will be included in the module as well, and which you should rewatch prior to this lecture series. Finally, you will be required to include research for building out the cultural contexts of your work. Yes, there's a video on that as well, which is good to watch prior to this lecture series on analytical writing. One of the first difficulties an analytical writer has is to figure out what to write about, the all-elusive thesis statement. When you watch a film, you say to yourself, what is this film actually about? In The Grapes of Wrath, you might be tempted to say that the movie is about the story of Tom Joad and the struggles he and his family faced as they migrated from Oklahoma to California in the early 1900s. I mean, that's good. The regular guy in me would agree with you. But the analytical writer in me will say that that is not really what the film is about. That's the first secret I have for you. It's not really a secret, to be honest. There's a theory in literature that all literature is part of the same universal story of humankind trying to figure out who they are and why they exist. To quote Macbeth, to be or not to be, that is the question. So if we expand that theory to include all art and film as a result of that, then we see how all films are also looking at the great mystery of life as part of that conversation. So I would call the story of the Joads the surface of the film, like the surface of the ocean. And the water underneath that surface, well, like the snowy woods of Robert Frost, it's dark and deep. You have to get beyond the surface to get at the bigger conversation, the dark, deep water of it. So how do you do that? An easy method for this can be found in the way religious texts are commonly studied. As theologians can tell you, these are experts in religious texts. You concern yourself to a degree with the question of how. Not just the how of the surface story, but the how of its very creation. The author and the society in which she created. Yes, the how is important, but the theologian also wants you to concern yourself more with the question of why. In other words, when people study religious texts, they are naturally encouraged to not just think about the story on the surface, but to go deeper into what relevance that text has in determining how a person should live their life today. Was there a warning to avoid a behavior? Was there a call to action to see how you should engage with others? Is there a commentary on how the society should work best for the individual? All art, perhaps all that is natural and human-made, to be honest with you, every single thing has in it this potential for you to take it and look inward through it at what it is trying to say about you and your life and your society in this moment. Sometimes I find the most inward thinkers are the most outward thinkers, astrophysicists. I would theorize that the astrophysicist and the theologian are certainly concerned with a similar subject matter. How did we come to get here and why? Is it any wonder then that the person who discovered the Big Bang, astrophysicist George Lemaitre, was also a Catholic priest? So what's the point of all this? My point, my friends, is that in seeking a bigger universal idea within a work, you got to get beyond the surface of its narrative and into yourself a little bit. In education, we've turned this into a dreadful thing, a task that's required of you, and it takes away the wonder of it. I encourage you to naturally seek these ideas out because, in my opinion, that's why the art was created, and it's why great art endures through generations. It will make you appreciate the art more completely. And yes, it will make finding thesis statements easier as well. So now go back to the story of the Jodes. They endured great suffering. Why? Was it justified? Did they deserve it? Were they victims? Why were they victims? How can seeing the Jodes' pain help us in understanding how we should treat others in society? Or you may have noticed Ma Jode at the end of the film, despite horrific loss, has not lost her spirit. Why? What is it about people that they can keep going despite such trauma? You see what I'm doing here? I'm using the film to help raise questions that make me look inward, where I discover big ideas from the surface of the story to better inform how I should live my own life. One way in which we can put these is in cause and effect statements, like if blank, then blank. In The Grapes of Wrath, you might recall that what set the Jodes on their desperate journey is that the farmers were being displaced off land they'd worked for ages because the land was too dry, and the invention of tractors was making those farmers unnecessary. So you may write your if-then statement like this. If conditions change in a society related to the environment or to technology, it may lead to suffering by the most powerless within it. So if you then think about the modern impact of that statement, you may think about, for instance, COVID. The COVID crisis in our modern society, that's a type of environmental change. And there's lots of research out there that shows that poorer communities suffered the most in regard to poor medical care, loss of work, and access to food. They are our modern age Jodes. If you then look at this if-then statement that gets beyond the surface of the narrative, you can easily see how it applies to yourself in today's world. And then guess what? If you've got that link, you've got yourself a really good thesis statement.